hear me now? Am I good? What do you want me to say? You don't want me to sing. I know you don't want me to sing because that would not. No, Carol, I'm not. It's not happening. No. So sorry, volunteer. All right. Where's your lovely other She's over there talking. Okay. See, it's all about the relationship. We talked about that. So, first I just want to say thank you for everybody coming out today. It is so super encouraging to have people here. When we first talked about this, we kind of wonder, okay, you know, if we build it, will they come? We're kind of hoping so. That seemed to happen. So appreciate everybody this morning. It's been awesome. And so definitely very grateful for this. So what we're going to do is we've got some of the questions that, well, actually I've got all the ones that have been handed to us. So if you have a question, please give it to us on a card. We're going to try to get to as many as we can. So basically I'll just read off the questions and then different members of the panel will answer those questions basically from the perspective that they know of, because obviously I don't fit every category. So with that, all right, so one of the first questions is, how can certain privileges, white, social class, whatever, be used to benefit God's kingdom? Or a kingdom perspective of the practicals. The first thing I thought of and talked with my wife was this class today. We used what God's given us through our jobs and our life and where we're at to help host this class. That was, you know, God's helped us out, so what can I do? And for me is for me to be able to speak out about the things that I see. For, you know, sometimes, and I'll just be honest, sometimes if a person of color talks about what's going on, people may not listen and go, that person's just kind of complaining, or they're being this. Well, no. Well, if I'm speaking about it, I'm speaking because I'm seeing my brother or sister hurting. And so for me to help speak up for the people that aren't being heard. That's my first thought. Yeah. Anybody else?
Amy? No. Yes.
It's our first time doing this, by the way, so.
Okay, well, I guess for me as a white woman, I would look at it as we have a chance to be open and communicate and truly bring in our perspective, but listen to other people's perspectives as well. So it's really about being honest and open and communicating.
Hey, just keep it. I'll let whoever has the microphone read the next question. Oh, it's Michael.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think, you know, like in whatever area, you know, we have privilege, whether, I mean, whatever. But I think a lot of times in our communities reflect the demographic that we come from. And so, like, in some communities, maybe you don't see people that look like me. So having me over for dinner and my family sends a message to that community, you know, about who you love. You know what I mean? So I think that's a powerful way to use what we have.
And not to a restaurant, but to the home.
Not to a restaurant, but in the home.
In the home.
In the home.
Come on, girl.
Yeah.
I think those are all great answers, and I like what you said, especially Kevin, in speaking out sometimes for people who can't. But I think also, the specific question is, if there is a privilege, how can you use it or whatever? And I've said often there's a reality in our country that we have two sons. There are things because of the color of our skin that I can do that they cannot. And that's just a reality. My parents never had to talk to me about, don't ever, ever, ever run from the police. They never had to talk to me about how you behave. We have to have that talk with our sons. And so there's recognizing that reality, and, in a sense, there are times where I think you can utilize it. You can speak up for people. If you see someone being mistreated, we've even done that in South Africa one time. I was in a restaurant and this white man was speaking very disrespectfully and racially charged to the young lady behind the counter. And she couldn't say anything back, but I could. I could sure be like, you cannot talk to her that way, right? And there was even another example where, now we didn't wind up, it wasn't necessary, but my wife, her brother was going through some things in our hometown where he was having to deal with some government agencies, and they were not treating him well, and it was inappropriate the way they were treating him. And so I asked her, I said, hey, if you need me to drive down there and throw a little white privilege around, I will. Because here's the reality. I don't necessarily like that term, but there is some reality to it where if I walk in, I'm going to be treated differently. If I'm wearing dress clothes and I'm this white man, and I walk in and it's like, okay, so I can utilize that to speak out for people, for the benefit of people, and say, you know, there are some opportunities that I have. It's not to say I had things given to me or I grew up rich. That's not what that term means. It just means that you're sort of given the norm and the benefit of the doubt in your culture, and there's a higher respect often that's given, so you can utilize that. The next question is a good one. How do we handle things posted by disciples? Right there, you see, social media. Oh, social media. Before I even finish reading this, I will say the Bible does say be careful how you act in front of outsiders, and social media is the biggest window to the outside world ever. But how do we handle things posted by disciples trying to remind us of atrocities perpetrated in the past? Is that helpful? I'll pass it down that way. You looked like you wanted that mic, Denise. Come on.
Come on. So, what I believe,
hold the mic up.
Oh, hold it.
Yeah, they need to hear you back there.
Let's say
In the cheap seats.
my voice carries. So the perspective that I have on social media might be slightly different than some of the people who are a little bit younger than I am. So when I look at social media and what it can be used for, I try to look at it from the godly perspective. Here's some technology that God has given us that we can use. However, with everything, it takes discipline and trust and being wise. So the answer to the question would be, when I see things posted on Facebook from a sister or brother in Christ, I look at it and I'm like, okay, is this something that is helpful or not? And is this something that maybe I can help that sister or brother with? So sometimes I'll post scriptures out there. So I try to always pray about what my response will be. So for me, I will post something to Facebook to try to encourage that sister or brother. Then if they need help, because some of them are younger, and it's about giving grace and not being, you know, oh, look what they did. And because sometimes people read all of the posts. So that's why, even though you may say, oh, no, they should have posted that, then put something encouraging on there so that, one, we can bring that brother or sister back to Christ, and then that way people can see this is how God's kingdom works. We love each other, we give each other grace and mercy, and then we give them the scriptures.
Jared? No?
Oh, take it. I mean, I don't really use a lot of social media. I mean, I started, but it wasn't for me. But I do think that when you put something out there, it's forever. You know, it's all, and so as a disciple, I want people to see, am I reflecting Jesus? Right. Is this what I want people to have that lasting memory? So I think that sometimes we just take a moment to pause before we hit submit and make sure that this is the image that I want people to remember me by forever. And so is there something that I can use this in a positive way? And I think, you know, like reading in your book, there's a lot of these terms that come up today, and they started out as a good thing, but now they're just a hotbed. and now they're just misconstrued. And so, can I share that same message in a different way versus using my emotions at this time right now? So.
Yeah, I'll say something here. First, more general, and then I'll answer the specific question. I think in general, the standard I try to remind people, whether they're talking about celebrities or posting on social media or whatever, is could you share your faith with that person after you spoke about them if they knew what you said? And I think we're very quick to, we'll watch a game and be like, that guy's an idiot, he's trash. We'll just turn on the news and be like, this guy's a clown or whatever. Well, could you share your faith with that person if you heard what you said or saw what you posted? And I think that's a good standard. And then as far as the specific question, I often tell people, my standard for me in living is if somebody says, are you tired, are you sick? I always say, sick is a choice, tired is a choice. That's true for me. But I wouldn't hold that standard to other people. Other people are like, tired is not a choice for me. I get it. And my point with that is, I think we get into very dangerous ground if we start telling other people how they should grieve or how they should feel about a difficult situation. So the specific question here is, if someone else posts, to remind us about atrocities of the past, I don't feel like it's my place to say, hey, you shouldn't be grieving about that. Right. Get over that. And I think on a really practical level, I have seen people literally post something on social media and say, 9/11, never forget, and then turn around and say, why do you got to keep bringing up the past about racial atrocities? I've never heard anybody say, why do you keep bringing up 9/11? That's in the past. It's an atrocity. You know what I mean? And so, and it's, I think a really important thing for people is validation of their pain. Yeah. And when we start saying, well, you should be over that, well, you were abused 30 years ago, you should be over that. Well, in some ways that's true, but in other ways it's important to remember that and to validate that. And if the impact of those things are forgotten, that's a greater danger than being over-reminded of them. And the same token, I never hear anybody say, do we have to keep bringing up World War II and what the Nazis did? So there's sort of an inequity of when we want to be reminded of the past and when we don't. And I think I'm just throwing out there that it might stem with we don't want to be reminded of things when it's a little uncomfortable with our identity as we see it. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I'll just add one thing to what Michael said. Like using that as an example. So, the people that fought for us, or the people that took on, suffering for us, that may have fought in World War I or World War II. Like in the wars. Like, I've taken care of multiple veterans and their pain is deep. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And so I think when we think about that and we can see it in terms of people that fight for us, it's easier to, or if we can see that type of thing and understand that there's, people that chose to go and go through those things for us that are still dealing with mental health, the way that people came back, and I'm not trying to get political, but I'm just saying, the way that some families are still devastated by that, children are devastated by that. If you can understand that, that's just a little bit of a window into what some of our families experienced by the hurts that happened. So I guess when Michael is saying the validation, if we don't admit that it happened, that's what it feels like we're denying the pain of all those people that suffered for our country. For me, it's the same.
Amen. So one of the questions is, what do you recommend for a church to do as a follow-up to this workshop? And are there plans for follow-up? I know, first off, if you haven't read the book yet, get a copy. And I think, like what we actually did with our Bible Talk group, and a lot of them are actually on this panel, was we started reading the book together and then discussing the questions and how do we work through this? How do we have these conversations? Where does it start? And so part of it is taking some, honestly, it's like a lot of times we can put everything on leadership. Well, how come they didn't do this? Or how come they didn't do that? Or why didn't the, okay, Cheryl, you need to go do this tomorrow. And somebody will want to put all that pressure on. We can't do that. Sometimes we got to go, well, what can I do? And I know for me, personally, it's like, one, what can I do as far as, like with my small group, and what can I do there? If we can at least start, it's a catalyst. And I think also it's like, one of the things we've talked about is forming a group that, and a lot of them will probably be the ones on this panel given the choice, is let's us learn on what we can do and educate ourselves and then help pass that on. Michael's given me a list of books already to read that I started reading so I can start understanding other cultures and things so that I can grow from where I'm at. So I know that's one. Yep.
So something that I have been working with in our school as a teacher is diversity and equity training. And one thing that I think is important to understand is that it's a journey. And a racial journey it changes daily. And so just to remember that we're all in a different spot and we may not always be in the same place. And so to really be sensitive to other people and where they're coming from.
So the cool thing is a lot of the questions are some of the same questions. So if you see me putting them to the back, it's because, okay, we got that one here already, so I'm not trying to ignore your question. So here's a good question. It's like, what is a culturally sensitive way to ask someone about their culture without offending them or coming across as insensitive?
Come on, Denise. Come on, Denise. She looked over right away. So I knew she... All right, Gary.
I think personally that's just an individual.
This is gonna be good. Come on.
I think that's an individual issue because for me, I need for people to just come and be straight up front. Yeah. And I don't need to beat around the bush. I just need to know it directly. That's just my own opinion.
So, I guess if you can't tell, I'll put the softer tone to most things. And the reason why I come from that is because that's not my nature. My nature is not to be kind and nice and patient. That is just, I'm just being real, that's just not my nature. However, with God's word, that has helped to change me a little bit. So, the answer to that question would be, if you don't want to go up and ask someone something that has to do with their culture, whenever you approach people, if you approach them with the idea of, I want to learn, I want to love you. I mean, everything has to come from, if I haven't learned anything in my walk with the Lord, everything that drives me has to come from the example that Jesus left us, and it has to be driven by love. It can't be, well, okay, here's a checkbox off, and here's someone who looks different, and it has to be, I wonder what that person is thinking or feeling. I wonder if X, Y, Z that I know has happened, I wonder how that makes them feel. Because when we start doing that, then it makes this journey that we have until we get called home, it makes it a little bit easier because, as we all know, it's not going to be what you said or did, it's going to be how you made people feel.
I think the only thing I would add is just make sure you approach it with humility. As Denise said, like you're trying to learn about them and have no other motivation really. It's just to get to know the person and so you know how to share in their experience.
Yeah, I remember when I was in the war back in the 90s, the Gulf War, and I got to go over to Saudi Arabia and just seeing how the people were they were like, you drive down the street and people were just celebrating because you were there to help. but I actually got to meet some of the people, and it was just a really rich experience just to understand their culture and to just talk to people. So I just think about that, man, God created this big, vast world. And just the slice that we have is just a small piece of it. And there's so much more to learn and different cultures to experience versus just doing the things that we've always done. And so just love people and ask, because you just curiously want to know. You want to know. I want to know what influenced people. How did they get to where they are, and just somewhat be on that journey with them, but not really, because you didn't go through all the things they did. But just to understand people a little bit more.
When I was in nursing school, I worked at this clinic. It was like a free clinic, and it was in an area where it's like, people here like need the free, like seriously, do they need the free clinic? A lady walked in and she had almost a floor-length mink coat on, and she sat down. I did the intake with her, and like where she was financially, she needed the service there. But just thinking about that experience, what it reminds me of is, not judging a book by its cover. You don't know where people have been. And what it turned out was her husband had developed cancer, and all of their funds had been liquidated, so they needed help, right? And I think somebody spoke to it, maybe it was you, that said get to know people. So a lot of times if I see a difference, or if I see that somebody's come from somewhere else by our cultural experience, I'll say, hey, can we go to lunch together? So where did you grow up? How did you grow up? Like, what was important to your family? Asking just about where they came from, because I think that helps to take away some of the judgments that you might tend to, like the filters that we put on people, the definitions that we give them by our own experiences, helps with that, and it helps people to feel valued and appreciated and respected. If somebody has a hard exterior, why? Where did that come from? Where did that come from? Get to know them.
Okay, this question is asked a little bit different, so I'm not sure. Hopefully I get it right, but it says, how can we address issues with different people without having to sound prejudiced? And so I don't know if we're talking cultural issues, and not to do that, or I don't know if it's talking spiritual issues, you're coming across from this way. So I know one of the thoughts is just understanding that everybody has a different perspective, how we look at things. It doesn't mean it's wrong, it's just different. If I hold this card up like this and I say, what does that look like? Most of you in front are going to say, well, it looks like a line. But the people on the left or right, well, that looks like a card. It's going to look different depending on how I'm looking at it. And so I think if you get to know other people's perspective, you may not come across that. And I think that getting to know people is the biggest thing. It's like so often it's like we make assumptions based on our paradigm and how we grew up, and again, most of the time I'm cheating because I've learned most of this from Michael's book, but it's like I tended to look at people from what I thought, well, if I acted that way, here's what it meant. But if I don't talk to them and know them, I shouldn't make assumptions. So I think don't be quick to judge would be my first thought.
I want to share an experience that I had when we were first married. We're very different, obviously. And Mike comes from a family that is really outspoken, and that you don't have to guess what they're thinking, they'll let you know. And getting to know Mike and going over to his house and spending time with his family, because even his living situation was very different than mine. I had my mom and dad and siblings, where Mike grew up with his mother, grandmother, aunt, and cousin all in the same house. And at different times there was different family members, so that's even different. So going over to his house with his aunties, they would let you know if they thought you gained weight. That was a huge issue for me, because that was something I was very insecure about. And you know, it seemed like every time I went over to spend time with his family, I would end up in tears. I was be very hurt by their words and really vow to hate them. And then Mike would have, you know, these feelings where, you know, he wanted to see his family, but he didn't want to see his wife hurt. So he was kind of like in the in-between. And so over time, through discussions and lots of fights, arguments, you know, I learned one thing, that I'm super sensitive. And what people are saying, they're not trying to be hurtful. And it's also how you respond to people when they say things too. So I learned a lot about myself. And then also that, you know, his family is just as important to us, to our children, as my family is. So I need to work on those things and not take it so personal. And so just learning that, you know, we have different culture backgrounds, and you laugh about, you know, those sayings, but it was, you know, every time going over there was something, you know, outburst that I wasn't used to. That's not how my family acted. And so I just say that just really learning how to work with each other, and also just examining your own life, because just because they say something, it may not be that they're wrong, but it may be, like in my situation, I learned that I am super overly sensitive. And it didn't just come out with his family members, but it came out with even other friends, family, and disciples. So it's not just about what they did wrong, but it's also about how you can change and grow too.
I would just add to that quickly. I think the key in any situation like that is humility, across the board. Humility and relationship. Where you build relationship, I think you lower the sense, or you build trust, and you lower the sense where there's the breeding ground to see something as prejudice or whatever. But humility in the sense of, I'm going to approach you in humility, and I'm going to disciple you or say whatever I need to. And if that came across as prejudice to you, then I'm going to listen to that with humility. And we can talk about it, and I don't need to be defensive. And I think if we're you know, with so many of the things we're called to in Christ, if just one person in the relationship is doing them, it gets tough. But if we're both doing it, it works really well. So if we're both showing humility, if we're both loving, if we're both, you know, bending and being all things to all people, then it works well. And then I would just reiterate, like anything else, there will be prejudice in the church. There will be bias in the church. Don't be naive and think that there's not, that there won't be. There will be. Why? There's so many passages in the letters where Paul says, bear with one another, forgive one another, you know, that kind of thing. Those are promises that we're going to hurt each other. You're going to need to do it. You know, when the Bible says, man, forgive and bear with each other, that's a promise that we will have things to forgive and bear about. We will hurt each other. So the next time a brother or sister hurts you and you feel like, man, I need to really bear with them or forgive them, rather than getting upset, you can be full of joy and say, it's another biblical prophecy fulfilled. Look at that. The Bible said it, and it happened. And so there it is. So these things are going to happen, but we've got to trust and love each other and work through them.
I like that. Sometimes you just got to go, duh. Okay. And I think one thing too is, like, I think the relationship does make a big difference. For people that don't know, like, Denise is one of my best friends, but they like, you guys fight like brother and sister. I love her and respect her more than probably anybody, but we can talk about anything because we have a relationship. So if you find you have a hard time talking to anybody, then just examine, what is my relationship with them? Yeah. Do they know me? Do I know them? You know, and take it a little deeper. It's okay. It's all right. Okay, so here's a question I know I don't have the answer to. Your thoughts on adjusting ministry and music worship styles for the non-dominants, not being in that category.
What are some thoughts? We know you can sing.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, one of the things that I think is, okay, so in any fellowship, right? In any fellowship, and I'll just share my perspective, like on the other side of whatever song I'm singing is God. Seriously, on the other side, like it could be, there is a hey, like we're praising God, right? Michael loves that song. But anyhow, but I also know, you know, like for me, when I clean my house and open my windows, like I listen to gospel music. Like there's just something, you know, there's something about the name Jesus. Yeah. You know, it just is. And so I think there again, you know, we approach it in the same way. Like one way is not better than the other. God allowed it all to be made to praise Him. Yeah. So where do I need to grow in that? Like I said, I can praise God in any song that I'm singing. But at the same time, there are certain songs that feed my soul differently, and that I think even help me to understand like where God is walking with me differently than some other songs. And so if God allowed it to be made, like it's okay to praise Him with it.
I don't think there's a simple answer to that, in the sense that that's going to be church specific, and it is difficult if a church says, wow, we really need to grow in our musical diversity. And that's important because music is the language of culture. It's what speaks to people's hearts. It's what, you know, moves. And so never hearing the music that you sort of culturally connect with is like being in a community where you never hear your home language. And it gets tough after a while. But at the same time, you know, if Kevin and I are leading singing, rhythm ain't gonna happen. It's just, we can try all day long. You know what I mean? And so there are issues of, sometimes for church it might be, you know, going and recruiting and saying, hey, we need you to be part of this. Sometimes, you know, we've had situations where the music ministry needed to grow, and there were people who were critical of it, but they wouldn't step up and do anything in it. And for whatever the reasons that are, that happened. But I think the big thing is, and we forget sometimes in areas like this, is if you need to grow, pray. God works things out. You know, we were praying, we needed some areas of growth in that in Minneapolis, and you know, I won't go into all the details, but my wife couldn't do some of the music things because of her job and some different things, and so I just started praying about it, and lo and behold, in the last little bit, her job switched, and now she can be involved. And then we hear tell like somebody connects, a professional singer from another town contacts us and goes, oh, we're moving into Minneapolis. And so we needed to go in you know, a particular kind of gospel music thing, and she's like a blues and R&B professional singer. Wow. So it's like, I see what you did there. So you pray and you have patience, and to step a little bit outside of that, sometimes I think it's just honesty too. We had a situation in Minneapolis, and this was several years ago, where we were going to sort of reintroduce our leadership team. And there was 10 guys in the leadership team, and the reality is, one of the guys said, you know, I'm a little nervous about us all getting up on stage at the same time because we're all white. So the visual of it just worries me. And I said, do you think people don't know? Like, figure that out? And so we talked and we prayed about it, and what we eventually did is we stood up on stage and said, listen, we believe firmly that these are the guys God has raised up to be leaders in His kingdom. We believe firmly that we're not just going to put somebody in a spiritual leadership position for external reasons, but at the same time we believe firmly that God has called us to be a family of all nations, and all cultures, and that should be reflected at every level. And so we think that right now we are a reflection of the divisions of society and the inequities of society, and that's not good enough for us. And so while we believe this is where God has brought us now, we're working on this. And we're praying and we're wrestling with one another and with God. So we ask for your patience, but we ask for the steady pressure, and we ask for your grace, and pray for us and with us as we do this. And God answered those prayers. The next two guys that we put on the leadership team were non-white, and they were absolutely qualified and the right guys to do it. So I think if you're just open and honest about it, sometimes we're afraid to be honest and be like, yeah, well, our singing is really white right now. We're working on that. But there are differences too, because I know I had a conversation with the brother, he leads a church down south in our family of churches, and we were talking, I said, man, I'm always telling the song leaders, like, we gotta have more gospel music, we gotta have some, maybe Spanish songs, some African things, we gotta mix it up. And he's like, that's funny, because I'm always telling my song leaders, we gotta sing some country music for the white folks. So, because they're a little more of a different dominant group. So, yeah, and there's not an easy answer, but I think we work on these things together as family, and they work themselves out. So, anyone else want to add to that?
So, I'm not like a musician. I can't sing. I don't remember how to play any instruments. However, the only thing that I did want to share is that, there's always like two sides to everything. So I totally agree with like what you guys were saying about singing really is worshiping God, and just always keeping that mentality. And the piece that I wanted to share was that I came from Atlanta. So of course I have a particular different exposure to the music ministry because of the people that got baptized in Atlanta that did our music. But even when I left there, I still had to understand what the worship service is really about. So I think, like you're saying, I think that, and of course, particularly being a non-dominant out here in Kansas, I do think that if we just keep working together and praying together, because I don't think, just to be clear, I'm like, okay, so we can't go all gospel because that's not realistic or fair or anything else, but just saying, okay, are there any ways for us to improve, and then for us to be able to hear each other if there's any suggestions or recommendations without being critical, but still giving our heart during the worship service when we are singing.
Amen. Amen.
I could sing now for everyone if you'd like.
Your wife.
Did somebody just say get your wife to do it?
Yes.
That's hateful. You're assuming that I can't sing.
He can sing, he just can't dance.
No, I can't sing.
Okay. And I think this might have been more what one of the other questions was, but how do disciples call one another higher without being insensitive, but holding to the biblical standard? I think, first of all, the Bible's still the Bible, regardless of what's going on, but I think the relationship also of knowing, but it's like the scripture is still the scripture. It's like I was thinking the social media question, it's like, well, the Bible does talk about being wise and how you act towards outsiders, but it also talks about shining like stars, and it also talks about, if you look in 1 Peter, where he says, basically, I'm losing my train of thought, but basically, how we are seen by the world makes a difference. And so it's like the Bible's still the Bible. It's like, do we take away discipleship because somebody's a different culture than us? I don't think so. But any other thoughts?
I was going to say, and sometimes people are the same culture as us. Like there was one sister, Michael know who I'm talking about, but she would be like, them people at the church. I'm like, wait, what people? You talking about your people? Like your brothers and your sisters? Those people, our brothers and sisters? You know what I'm saying? Okay, now let's start over. And she's like, well, my brothers are, yes, that's what I'm talking about. You don't put yourself against them, because them is us, So I think that's how I do it. You know, like it may not necessarily be, okay, let's sit down and go to a coffee shop or whatever, but it's just in the moment, because that's how we do life together, in the moment.
The only thing I'll add to that is, you know, I think a lot of us know in the Sermon on the Mount, as Jesus sums up the whole sermon, he says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And it's obvious that we apply that on an individual level, but I think sometimes we forget to behave with the church, I'll use that term as a whole, with that same ethic. To treat the church as an entity the way I would want to be treated. So people get frustrated over something and be like, man, if they don't get that together, I'm leaving. Well, how would you like that if the church treated you that way? If the church came to you and said, you know, you've had 3 months to work on this and you haven't gotten it together, so we're going to have to break up. That, you know what I mean? That's not how we would want to be treated. So treating the church with the same patience and grace that we as individuals would want to be treated with is important.
I also think it's important to remember that it's a discipling relationship, and within a relationship that comes with open communication. And in order to grow, there's going to be some discomfort. And if they're telling you something that they're saying, then obviously other people are seeing it too. And so it's not there to like make you feel bad or feel like they're being prejudiced, but it's there to help you grow. And in my experiences, every time I was uncomfortable is where I grew the most.
Okay. Should disciples participate in activism? And if so, how?
Just give him the mic. Just give.
No. No, they should not participate.
That's it.
That's it.
And believe it or not, I agree with you. Because I think that we have to be very careful that we are, you know, we live in this world, but we're not supposed to be, you know, of the world. And so I think, you know, like if we're going to go to certain marches and things like that, I just think that we just have to be really careful. And this may be like really hard, you know, to hear, but like I said, a lot of it is just from growth. And so the thing is that I would always think about what is it that that God wants for me to do. Yeah. So with that being said, when I think of activism, I think of some of the things that are going on, you know, like around now. And I think that like the Me Too, the Black Lives Matters, those are some of the most current things that we see. So you're thinking, well, okay, what does she not believe in those things? Or, however, what I do believe is that there's a way for me to say, okay, here's a group of people that have a particular opinion that may be hurting. Yeah. Do I know any of them? Is there any way that I can maybe build a relationship with them? This might be a great opportunity to share God's word. And so that's kind of where I'm hoping that I can still continue to be trained in God's word so that I can make the most of every opportunity versus like just kind of like going along with the crowd, but also helping them so that they can get rid of some of the hurt and the bitterness that I know that I felt and that I've went through.
I think in 2 Corinthians 10, Paul sums it up well, and he says, we fight, but not with the weapons of the world. Yeah. And so I think that's the thing. There's sort of a misunderstanding that if we are not partaking in the, you know, if we don't get involved in politics, we don't get involved in activism, we don't get involved in this and that, that means we do nothing. And I think that's a mistake too. I think the kingdom should stand up against these things. And one of the slides that we skipped, it said, you know, standing up for the oppressed, standing up against injustice are not being political. Those are things that we should do. But I do think there's a problem, as you were sort of alluding to, when you yoke yourself together with political parties or movements of the world, that's a problem. But I think as a kingdom, that doesn't mean we just sit back and ignore things either, because that's not going to cut it in the world in which we find ourselves today. The church could get away with that maybe 50 years ago. It cannot today. We have to stand up and speak out against these things, but with the kingdom solutions, and from a kingdom perspective, and I think not from a worldly perspective.
And so I guess it all depends on how you describe activism as well. So does activism, is it described as advocacy? Because I feel like there are a lot of situations, like Jesus advocated for the oppressed, you know, amongst like the higher ups and whatever. So like an example that I would give is, you know, Minnesota is where like the first domestic violence shelter was started in the US, right? So, you know, one of like, we're called to be the hands and feet of Jesus, right? So maybe not necessarily for myself, the way that I feel most effective is not going out and necessarily marching, but to speak on behalf of people that don't have a voice. Number one, with my hands and with my feet. So going to be with those people and, you know, to really try to understand their story, one person at a time. So, you know, I'm being trained to be a domestic violence advocate, but not necessarily to go up and speak to legislation, but to be with each woman or man that's in their pain in that moment, which is what I totally feel convicted that Jesus would do, and he's there, you know? So I feel like it's how you advocate, you know, like even with some of the shootings / black on black violence that we have in Minnesota, like a group of us have made, helped to contribute to the meals for funerals of these families. We don't know them, but at the same time, we know they're suffering, and I know how I would feel if my child or one of my friends, sisters, children, black, white, whatever, if their life was taken. So I feel like there's an opportunity to advocate from a Christ perspective, like who would Christ be with and who would Christ speak for, you know, but how would he do it? And I think that's what you were, you know, so it's how we go about it. And it's one thing to expect somebody else to do it, you know, or like I know we have people like lining the streets and that sort of thing. In a hurting world that has no hope, that's how people can do sometimes, but we have hope. And so I think in that, that's how we can bring to light like who Jesus is, because in those moments when people are alone, suffering, you know, have nothing, you know, at one point in my life, like we had to leave everything that we had, everything. Like I didn't have a shoe, nothing but the stuff on my back, you know, so I've been there. But it was people like that God sent, you know, to help me in those moments.
Okay, another question is using language like I'm white or my family is black destructive for the purpose of unity, or is it still respectful of cultural differences?
Can you repeat that again?
Is using language like I'm white or my family is black destructive for the purpose of unity, or is it still respectful of cultural differences? So I guess using the language, does that create disunity, or is it just respecting this is kind of who I am?
Anyone else throw out? Listen, I think, you know, as we kind of established today, these categories aren't real as far as true, genuine humanity differences. But at the same time, everybody understands them. There is, I think, some benefit in understanding it. Does tell us something about it. I don't think it's offensive. And everybody has to make their own choice, but I do think it's funny, you know, when somebody wants to go so out of the way that they'll be like, hey, the big guy over there with the glasses, you know, the one with the boots, and it's, you're like, why don't you just say the black guy? You know, I mean, there's 10 people around and there's one black guy. It would have been a lot more efficient. You know what I mean? And so there are times and places, and I think it's the way you use those terms. But if it's simply descriptive. I don't think it's playing into saying, you know, I'm now buying into this whole concept of race and power and division that's gone on. It's simply a descriptive thing. And if somebody's more comfortable saying the brown person or whatever, you know, so I think it's kind of a personal thing. But I think it would just be problematic and clunky if we all said, let's pretend to not use those words, you know, like, to me, it doesn't make sense, so.
Anyone else? Gary wants to hear? No. Okay.
I like Gary, man.
We do too.
I like me
as well.
All right.
Because Gary's like E.F. Hutton. When he talks, people just kind of get quiet and listen, because just listen to a lot of. He's got some of the best one-liners. My favorite still is making a fast getaway on a rocking horse. We ever tried to do that before? Yeah. Kim and I joked about, oh, okay, all right. So what are some of the biggest issues you have had in your interracial relationship or marriage, and how did you resolve them or work through them?
Well, hey, we got lots of folks to answer that.
Well, I'm married to an Asian man, and for me, I think some of the hardest things for me to work through was just the differences in our backgrounds and how we were going to raise our children. Because for me, my home was very different, and this is where I saw my white privilege kind of come out, was because I was dominating how we were doing our holidays and how we were raising our kids. And so, I know without God, there's no way our relationship would still be in place right now. Because I had to really take a step back and remember that I chose to love this man, and I need to love everything about him. And that's also what comes with his background, his differences, how he celebrates the holidays. I need to take that into consideration. Another thing is just the hurt that I've seen through my kids. Because as a mother, I'm the one who takes them everywhere. And my oldest daughter, when she was younger, a lot of the kids in her school were white. And she got in the car and she said, "Mom, I wish I had eyes like yours and a nose like yours." And my heart broke. And that's when I realized I can walk into a room and automatically see somebody that looks like me. Not all my students, because I'm a teacher, or my kids can. And so it's just remembering to really empathize with those people.
Well, I shared earlier about the one experience, but there are a lot of differences, and just really, and sometimes you don't realize it till you're in the heat of the battle. So I think a lot of it is just you learn, but if you have the option, like if you're dating or you're engaged, just asking those questions and getting the help, because they'll come up, and sometimes they'll take you out of nowhere, but I think that what's helped us is just having God and people in our life, and at the end of the day, we're disciples, and we agree to love each other, and I think ultimately I'm grateful for the differences. It's really helped me to grow, but it wasn't easy, so.
Yeah, I think that's the thing for me. I just think that I try to get to know people as people first versus trying to put them in a box or anything like that, because again, when you walk into a room and you're the only person of that color, I mean, you could feel intimidated, but I still need to get to know people. I can't let that be a hindrance or just say I'm just not going to try to talk or understand people. So, that's the first thing. But then it's like the flip side. You get to educate people on your experiences. You get to just share the things that influence you, and there's a lot of life out there. There's a lot of things we've never experienced. So it's just fun to share things with people that they've never even heard of, and understand their life as well, what influenced them. So I think it was an adventure to get to know one another and just to know each other as people. And then what's even helped, that's just getting to know people. But when we do that with the mindset of how Jesus approached things, and just loving it, it makes it easier to absorb the differences.
I've had to learn the extreme value of lotion. The whole other level and my sons still make fun of me about that. I'm like, I don't like that thick lotion and stuff. And they're like, yeah, because you're white. You don't have to worry about ash. I get it. But no, I think for us, the big challenges have been cultural issues, which we talked about a lot, is just differing cultures. I think as far as the actual racial element of it, I don't think that has ever been a big difference to us. It's never been a big thing. And even when we face it from the outside, we sort of have fun with it. And it's kind of funny to us if people have a problem or treat us differently or whatever. You know, we were talking with, I think you guys earlier today, and like, you know, we were on a plane in South Africa one time, and I was sitting next to her and her two sons, and this stewardess came up and asked me if I wanted to move to a more comfortable seat. And I said, no, I'm good. And she goes, well, sir, we can get you a place that's a little more quiet and, you know, by yourself. And I said, no, I'll just stay by my family. And she looked like she'd seen a ghost. She was you know, but really, honestly, we haven't had a lot of things like that because I think it just rolls off our back when it does. We don't take it personal. And there's been times when we were in Minneapolis recently, we were looking to rent a house, and we talked to this place, and they're like, yeah, you can rent it. It was in a nice neighborhood, it was a nice house, and all of this, and it's yours, just come check it out, you can do it. And then we showed up and we got out of the car, and it was suddenly like, they saw her, and it was like, oh, well, we actually already have it for somebody, and made all these excuses why they couldn't rent us that house. And then like 3 or 4 weeks later, she looked and it was still available online, you know, so. But again, when it's like, well, I feel sorry for them. It's not, you know, because we would have done paid our rent every month on time. So,
God's going to get them back.
That's on you. So, but it is the cultural differences, and it's the cultural differences with not just us, but our families. You know, the thought of like I can't even imagine my dad and your grandma being in the same room together, like just so different. And so overcoming those things is tough.
You want to share any stories you shared with us?
We have so many. I mean, I'm serious. Like, you know, I think.
I guess she does.
She does.
Yeah.
She's like, no.
Now that I got no, but I think like some of those, how would you say, like anybody like in your first year of marriage, second year of marriage, like you go through these growing pains that you're gonna have anyway. But I think for us, you know, and especially coming from the vantage points that we came from, particularly me, like I can remember some of the things and the way that I was brought up, like the culture that was bred into me was more like, ain't no man, period, ain't no man gonna such and such. And so I think I carried a lot of that into our marriage. And my reason for saying that was, you know, when you meet the scripture and what God says about submission, surrendering, trusting Him, letting Him be the Lord in your life, you know, you stand up against that and you're like, okay, God, I can't contend with you. I know that I'm gonna win. I'm not gonna win. So I think with that, the scripture was what taught my heart to yield to what God said was right, even when I felt that there was something wrong. Like I remember calling Michael racist. Like I was like, you racist, you don't like my family, you know, but it wasn't racist, it was, oh yeah, I remember exactly what happened. But at the same time, yeah, but you know, it was because of some of these cultural things surrounding money. Like I was raised, your family is your family. If you have a beam, you split it in 4, so your 3 brothers can have a piece and you can have a piece. Michael wasn't raised that way. So when it came down to like our finances and all that stuff, it's like, oh, so-and-so needs this. We have it, it's theirs. Michael's like, no, wait. Wait. You know, so seriously, yeah, not even just retire, it was more like, okay, help so-and-so to stand on their own 2 feet, which I eventually learned that, you know, but at the same time, it took a lot, and it took for him to help me, God to help me widen my view through him. So, I mean, we had a lot of challenges, and I always tell people, if it were not for the people throughout Milwaukee that God used to reach out to us, we would not be here today because of it. And the perseverance, the commitment to live out God's word and know that if God says that it can work, then we got to keep working it.
Right. I might have to just give this back to you because the question is, Mrs. Burns, what was the biggest thing to overcome as a Christian marrying a white man?
I think I just kind of spoke to you. Ain't no man.
Ain't no man.
And that would have been any man, white or whoever.
It was super easy.
Okay, that's always the guy's opinion. I'm easy, right? Okay. That's actually, I think we've gotten through all the questions we had because we had a lot that were kind of a duplicate. And so again, I really seriously, sincerely want to thank everybody for coming. It's like when we started this, we're like, this is a start. And I please remember this. This is just a start, so it's what we all do from here. Yeah. And so what is my, and I think about that is what do I want to take away from this and do going forward? And so if you're visiting from the community and stuff, we're so glad you came, and definitely we're having our worship service here tomorrow morning at 10:30. Everybody's welcome back. I told them to leave all these seats set up, so if people want to come back from Kansas City or any place else tomorrow, come join us for worship. Michael's preaching again tomorrow, so you know we got him for the weekend, so I'm taking advantage. I'm crazy, not stupid. So again, just very grateful for having everybody here. Definitely want to thank Michael and Marcretia just for coming and just sharing with us. And I'll make another shameless plug. Do buy the book, and I'll tell you, like somebody was asking some different questions about, you know, what I say with white or black family and something. In the back of the book, there's a lot of little things to say, not to say, that are really kind of helpful. Because again, in the scripture I was thinking about earlier was in 1 Peter, where he talks about, you know, live such godly lives among the pagans, that though they speak ill of you, they'll glorify God when Jesus comes. And so it's like, what lives we live say so much to the community. And I think Michael shared this too, we won't answer the world's problems, probably in here, but we can be the light to the world. Yeah. And that's it's individual, and it's not, and I like that, it's like, oh, the church this, and the church, well, yeah, we are the church. Right. We all are. And so this is really us, our chance to just really shine for Christ in a way. I love that about that. Okay, now the new thing is, how do we be multicultural truly and really share God's light? So again, thank you everybody for coming. We're dismissed for today, and take a look at yourself.